News just coming in. China says that it is ready to fight the United States till the end if Washington escalates trade tensions, but keeps the door open for talks. Speaking at the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, Chinese Defense Minister has said that Beijing is open for talks despite the ups and downs in the U.S.-China ties. But he warned the U.S. of a fight to the finish if tensions continue to escalate. It comes less than a month after the U.S. slapped 25% tariffs on Chinese goods. This was the first time in 8 years, in fact, that Beijing has been represented at this level at the annual Asian Defense Forum.
As for the recent trade friction started by the U.S., if the U.S. wants to talk, we will keep the door open. If they want to fight, we will fight till the end.
Remember that Beijing and Washington have been vying for influence in the Indo-Pacific region, which hosts potential flashpoints such as the South China Sea, the Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese minister particularly emphasized that there has been a series of negative actions on the Taiwan-related issues from the U.S. side, which China resolutely opposes. He also said that when it comes to the issue of safeguarding sovereignty and territorial integrity, the U.S. should in fact never underestimate the resolve and capacity of the Chinese military.
If anyone dares to split Taiwan from China, the Chinese military has no choice but to fight at all costs. At all costs for national unity. I've taken note of the U.S. speech yesterday, which mentioned Taiwan. I want to ask, is the Taiwan Relations Act a law of Taiwan or law of the U.S.? Is it law of China or an international law? Is it an act of the United Nations? How can U.S. enact a law to interfere in China's internal affairs? Is there any sense in that?
Now, speaking about the India-China relationship, the minister said that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping have reached important consensus and the relations between both the countries are getting better. He also emphasized that there has been some differences between both the countries in the past, but that cannot be compared to the overall, in fact, cooperation, and that the Chinese side is ready to work with India.
Seen sort of differences in the relationship as well, but the differences cannot be compared to the overall sound cooperation. The Chinese side is ready to work together with India to properly handle the boundary question, and at the moment, the management of the boundary question is sound. The two sides has had close communication with each other, and the border area is generally stable. The common interests of China and India far outweigh our differences. A sound China-India relationship not only serves the interests of both peoples, it is also conducive to stability of the whole world.
And for more on the story, I'm now joined on the phone line by Atul Aneja, who writes for the Hindu newspaper from Beijing. Good morning to you, Mr. Atul. First up, of course, thank you for joining us here in WION. Now, the Chinese defense minister finished his intervention at the Shangri-La dialogue about an hour ago. In it, he spoke about China-India relations too. Specifically, he said that Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping have reached an important consensus and that the bilateral ties are getting, in fact, better. How do you view the evolving India-China ties? Is the Wuhan spirit working to India's advantage?
Well, I think there is a positive momentum in India-China ties. It happens, a major fillip to that, I think, took place when China agreed to designate Masood Azhar as an international terrorist. Thereafter, the visit of the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Vijay Gokhale, to China, or around that time of the designation, well, that visit was very significant because that laid the groundwork for planning the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi at the the next the sequel to the Wuhan summit which took place. Of course, the election results had not come out, but there was wide anticipation that the BJP would win and Mr. Modi would once again become Prime Minister. So that momentum is going on. That has taken a way forward, and I think we are likely to have a meeting in autumn, if not earlier, between the two leaders. So there is a positive momentum. There's a larger context to that, and which you mentioned, where the U.S. factor does come into play. China is presently facing a strategy of containment from the U.S. This has become very, very significant and very apparent from the trade war which is taking place. So that's not just a trade war; it's a multi-spectrum sort of strategy to contain China. It has also acquired tensions on the military front, as mentioned during the speech by the Chinese defense minister. So there is overall, in the overall context, the Chinese would not want that the U.S. that India.
Mr. Aneja, in fact, I'm glad you brought up relations between U.S. and China. Now, talking about U.S. and China relations, the Chinese minister warned the U.S. of a fight to the finish if Washington further escalates the trade tensions. But at the same time, he kept the door open for talks. What did you make of his intervention?
I think it was a very significant intervention by the Chinese defense minister, because the Chinese have been saying that they're ready for a dialogue with the Americans, whether it was during the trade negotiations, which have not resulted in anything positive, or when it comes to the issue of technology, like Huawei. It's got the daughter of the head of Huawei is in detention in Canada and probably waiting extradition to the U.S. So it's quite a number of dimensions, and the military one is extremely important. And I thought the Chinese defense ministers laid out a very clear red line, which was regarding Taiwan. It is very clear that China will stick to what is called the One China policy, which means no to separatism from any quarter, whether it is in the arena of Xinjiang, whether it is Tibet, but most importantly Taiwan. So I think he wrote down the rules that the China will not tolerate any move which could result in the independence of Taiwan. Short of that, they have they have agreements, that is the U.S. and China, on Taiwan. So if that is violated, then it's no holds barred. But within that extreme position, and now there is room for negotiations, and that's what the Chinese defense minister was saying, that we are ready to negotiate with you, but we are very clearly laying down a red line, which is no to separatism of Taiwan. If that happens, then China will fight.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Atul, for joining us here on World is One WION. You were right there listening to Atul Aneja of the Hindu newspaper.